Ladies and gentlemen, I am Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It is September 22nd, 2022. This is your daily Ukraine update, and we're going to be asking, is Ukraine going to keep the momentum up right till winter? And why is winter so significant for this conflict? Let's get into it. Okay, so first off, we look at the tactical map, and we can see that Ukrainian forces are trying to keep the momentum up in this much denser urban area. You can see that they have actually made some gains here at this village of Drobysheve. God help me. But you can see it's not a huge village by any stretch of the imagination. But what it does say is that Ukrainian forces are continuing to push along this critical line of contact south of the Oski River. Of course, you can see Russians are continuing to fall back in a lot of different positions. When we look at the daily updates, right, you can see that the only change they've made is what they're describing as clarification. Clarification usually in this mapping just sort of means that the intelligence of a region has improved somewhat and we know a little bit more about who is doing what where. As you can see, of course, the Kherson offensive is continuing, but at a much slower pace. But again, we shouldn't discount this sort of activity. You can see that even these slower paced activities are making real progress. I mean, look, months ago, Lysychansk was completely seized by Russian forces, and now Ukrainian forces are literally a kilometer from the outskirts of Lysychansk. A huge reversal in fortune by the Ukrainian forces, but it wasn't really fortune, right? It was good planning, good effort, and lots of good equipment. So why then is winter so significant? Well, let's talk a little bit more about the mobilization. Obviously, the Institute for the Study of War has a ton on it because they feel sort of stupid. As you might remember, on the 20th, their assessment was that there would be no change to conscription or mobilization, and now there is a tectonic change in conscription or mobilization. But they do add some interesting clarifications that have come out recently. First and foremost, those reservists, only reservists who've completed their initial military service. We've discussed this, that of course this is a huge number of men simply because Russia is a mandatory service country. But they do make up a good point. It's not clear how much of the reserve has already been deployed to fight in Ukraine. It's possible that a lot of tens of thousands of reservists have already been called up. Right. Of course, it says they were not very well trained to begin with and will get no refresher training. What is interesting is that they talk about how, let's see if I can find it. Here we go. Right, the Russian Ministry of Defense, Shoigu, described that there would be a deliberate training process going from individual reservist skills, crew, team, detachment, and finally platoon level operations before deploying them to fight. That is at least a couple of weeks, even if you were to sit there and go 1 week of crew, 1 week of crew and team, 1 week of detachment or squad, and 1 week of platoon level re-familiarization. That's still at least a month, though really in the US doctrine, if you wanted to train someone up to be proficient from 0 to platoon level operations, you're talking about probably a year plus, right? But a military commissariat in Kursk Oblast announced that reservists under 30 would deploy immediately with no additional training. Honestly, I'm going to be frank with you guys. Based on everything else we've seen in terms of primary sources from Russian troops, I think this is probably closer to the reality. Maybe not no training, but probably very limited training. Of course, there's a lot of discussion over Putin's nuclear threat, and while it doesn't make much sense for Putin to use nuclear weapons and turn Russia into an international pariah, probably at an unprecedented scale, Putin's not invading Ukraine also doesn't make a lot of sense. So again, it's something to bear in mind, and it is a worrying trend. Now, why am I talking so much about winter? Well, this is the important part, and for that, of course, we're turning to Ground News. They're the best source that I have found to help me tease out the political bias in news sources and to sort of triangulate the reality, especially in this conflict, because there's so much misinformation and disinformation. As always, I have a link to these guys in the description. You should check them out. They're free if you want, and you can subscribe if you want to support. Okay, so this is about energy. It all comes down to energy, right? So in this recently, right, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken warned Friday that Putin believes he can use energy to bully Europe out of supporting Ukraine and urged Europeans to stay united in the face of Russian aggression. He says Putin's weaponized energy against European countries standing up to his aggression and raising the costs on families, businesses, and entire nations. What is he talking about? Well, what he's talking about is, of course, European natural gas prices. There's a reason it auto-completes, guys, and that's because when we look at European natural gas prices over the last, let's say, month, you can see Europe is in for a hard winter, right? We look, this is going back 1 year, and you can see that as this conflict has escalated, natural gas prices have really spiked hard. And this is not an accident. This is a function of Putin's deliberate restriction. Russia provides almost all natural gas to Europe, and remember, Europe needs this natural gas to heat their homes. Something like 80% of homes are heated with natural gas, and so you could see that in May, right? Or let's actually look last year, last October, natural gas prices were at around 55, what is this measured in? 55 euros per megawatt hour of natural gas, right? Now they are going to be, if you had to do the same purchase this year, 191. So that's a fourfold increase. And again, that's euros per megawatt hour. And the euro, yes, is a little weaker, but this is a huge increase. And earlier, when Putin really wanted to put the squeeze on Europe, he was charging almost 350 euros per megawatt hour. What does that mean? That means when Europeans want to turn on their gas, they are going to be paying a small fortune to heat their homes as a direct result of this conflict. This is why the US is sending its top diplomat to try to bolster European unity in the face of what's going to be a really painful winter for Ukraine. Now, the other problem is, of course, Ukraine itself. This is a country north of the Black Sea, and when winter falls, combat operations get really hard. Even things like digging a fighting position become extremely challenging in permafrost. Keeping troops fed, keeping them adequately warm. Again, you have no choice but to ensure that you are able to get heat to troops, right? In these really wintry conditions, it can be really tough, and oftentimes that you see the ability to conduct defensive operations begins to grind to a halt. This will be true of Ukrainian troops for sure, but it will probably be doubly true, I suspect, of Russian troops who are going to go into this conflict with less equipment already. Right? Many of the Ukrainian troops we've seen, they have Western uniforms, modern materials, and just generally seem better equipped to handle the winter. Though Russians are, of course, a breed apart, it's possible that they can maintain some level of fighting spirit through this frigid winter. But it will be so tough on Ukraine because not only will their own troops be struggling with the cold, but their European allies will probably face a lot of political pressure from their constituents who are really going, paying 5 times as much for natural gas in the summer, right, during a heat wave, isn't that concerning an issue. But in the winter, it may become a critical issue. Of course, there are 2 sides to every transaction, it is worth remembering, and Russia also needs to sell natural gas in order to fund its combat operations. If it cannot raise capital, raise taxes, raise something in order to purchase more weapons, more material, pay more soldiers, then Russia's going to have way bigger problems. So I actually suspect that while Europe will not be thrilled about the raising costs of natural gas, Russia will need to sell natural gas more than Europe needs to buy it. And so anyway, guys, that is, of course, all I had. Be sure to check out the link to Ground News in the description. Also, I just wanted to point out one other thing, and that is that YouTube has been cracking down a lot on my breakdowns of combat videos, even ones that are considered pretty tame. You can see they have really in the past month just sort of dropped the ban hammer on me. If you want some combat videos, or you just want to help support the channel, you want to see them over on the Patreon. I host them on Vimeo. YouTube can't touch them, and that's where I do all the breakdowns of the most intense combat videos. So definitely become a member of the Patreon. Thanks as always to my lieutenant tier patrons. You guys really make this channel what it is, and be sure to check out the link to Ground News in the description. I'll see you guys later.